Good morning, everyone. And welcome to the future of creative placemaking. It's a pretty exciting place to be, isn't it? Yeah? So we have a session, I think over there, right? Just one next to us? Anybody know? No? Yes? There's one next to us? Okay, so we're going to make a whole lot of noise right now so that they know we're here. Okay? So we have a great panel up here. Let's give them a big hand and yell and scream. Best workshop to be in this morning, for sure. Okay. I'm Margy Waller. Welcome here. Welcome to this panel. And I'll let the panelists each introduce themselves now.
Great to be with you. My name is Jen Hughes. I'm the Director of Design and Creative Placemaking at the National Endowment for the Arts. I've had the privilege to work there for the last 7 years and really be a part of this movement of creative placemaking. So it's great to chat with you all today about the future of the field.
Hi.
Jen on your new job.
Yay! I am Sarah Calderon. I am the Managing Director at ArtPlace's America, and I'll be talking to you more in depth about what we've been doing for the past year in a minute.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Maria Rosario Jackson. I'm an institute professor at the Herberger Institute for Design and the Arts and a professor in the College of Public Service and Community Solutions at Arizona State University. I'm leading the Creative Placemaking Initiative there and also work with Regina as Senior Advisor at the Kresge Foundation.
Good morning. I'm Regina Smith, and I'm Managing Director of the Arts and Culture Program, which is a national program at the Kresge Foundation. We're a independent private foundation. I've been with the foundation for about 10 years. I'm happy to exclusively focus the arts and culture portfolio on equitable creative placemaking practices.
Thank you. So I'm going to just share with you our hopes for this morning. We want you to have a chance while you're here to hear more about the Bridgespan report that these 4 organizations commissioned and worked on together, and as well as a little bit about ArtPlace's plans. You'll have a chance to react to and share your thinking about the future of creative placemaking and the field, and some thoughts about how you may see yourself and your organization or your project within that context. So questions, ideas, suggestions, all are welcome today. You should be sitting at a table where there are art supplies, and we are going to use those. So you have that to look forward to. And I think we're going to start with, Sarah's going to do a little bit of overview on the Bridgespan results.
Sure. So I'm going to go through this quickly. I should mention that if you go to our website and go to our blog, there's a whole blog post on the work that we did, as well as links to a PowerPoint that has a lot of the findings from the study. There's also a link to the raw data. So if you are so inclined, you can go do your own research and figure out and double check that what Bridgespan did is correct. So just a little bit. So Jamie mentioned this very briefly the other day. I think he mentioned that we spent money on consultants. And we did actually find out quite a bit about the field, right? The idea was to figure out, ArtPlace was set up to create a strong field of creative placemaking, right? Build on the amazing work that had been going on for many years and continue it and try and strengthen the field. And so we wanted to understand how we were doing with that. And so Bridgespan had a strong field framework, and you'll see it up here. Again, nothing mind-blowing, but right, that a field needs to have a shared identity, standards of practice, a knowledge base, leadership and grassroots support, and policy and funding to support it. And that there are different levels of strength in a field. Margy, can you? Thanks. So in order to determine how strong the field was, Bridgespan did 2 different things. They did a survey. Who here participated in our survey that we sent out? Thank you. So they did a survey. We had over 3,300 people who responded to the survey, which was really wonderful, and we appreciate everyone who took the time to fill it out. And then they did interviews. So they did 47 interviews. Most of the people were people in the creative placemaking field, but we also tried to get some people who were outside of the tent of creative placemaking. And what they did, besides sort of determining that we were, if you could, a moderately strong field is how they determined that's how strong we are. We are moderately strong. We still have a lot of work to do. They gave us sort of some priority actions for the field to move forward with. And so here, this is sort of what I wanted us to discuss today. For a shared identity, here, I'm just gonna open it here because I can't see it. They felt that we should articulate and communicate the values of the field to all types of communities, recognizing historical baggage. So we should really make a point as a field, not just as ArtPlace, but to start articulating what our values are. They felt that for standards of practice, we really needed to build resources for how to do creative placemaking. Not just sort of about what it is, but really helping people understand how to do this work and really build on case studies. We're starting to get a lot of that from the research work that ArtPlace is doing and that others in the field, a lot of our partners are doing, which is really exciting, but that we really need to build that up a little bit more. We then need to understand the field better with more credible research. This is happening right as work is seeping into higher education more, and as all of our partners and others are doing work around this, we're getting more research, but there still needs to be more in the field. We need to develop diverse new leaders, including leaders of color, and those who work in a variety of settings. So really looking across the field, looking at rural, urban, suburban, different communities across the country, and really figuring out a way to build up leadership in the field. We need to continue to drive adoption in community planning and development, right? Thinking about sort of the two sides, the arts field and the community planning and development field, really continuing to drive adoption in community planning and development, and increase the level, diversity, and sustainability of funding. So I think these are things that all fields that are moderately strong probably need to do, but this is what they just sort of came back to us with. Can you go to the next? And you'll see they just as a frame of thinking about this, they really took all of the priorities and then mapped from the survey and from the interviews how they came up with the priorities, right? So that there were identified weaknesses in the field that were identified, and then prioritized actions that were all questions that were asked in the interviews and on the survey. For those of you who took it, you might remember some of these questions about sort of what should the field be doing and what is the field good at and not very good at. So that's just a quick overview. Again, everything is on our website, including the raw data, if you want to go investigate it further.
Okay. So the rest of the session we're going to spend talking about what we've just heard and what your thoughts are. So I'm going to ask you, if you look to your, the people sitting sort of next to you or across from you, someone at your table, do you see someone at your table who you don't know very well or not at all? If you see someone there you don't know, sit with them, and if you need to move, find someone you don't know very well or not at all, please move. So we're going to have a conversation in pairs.
Does everybody have a partner now? Okay, so with your partner, I'm going to give you about a minute, and I'll tell you when to switch, just sort of introducing yourselves, okay? Go. Okay, I'm going to give you your first prompt now. Maybe. Now I'm going to give you your first prompt. Okay, so you should take a piece of paper, each of you, from the stack. You can take colored or white, whatever you like, and then there should be a bunch of art materials, colored pens, pencils, crayons, and use as many as you want. If you need more, I have some more up here. And your first prompt is, and you're going to both talk, and I'll give you a time to switch so you can take turns. The prompt is, how are you feeling about the field moving forward? What do you think the field needs to be stronger and create more opportunities for people to engage in creative placemaking? How are you feeling about the field moving forward? What do you think the field needs? And you can give comments, you can ask questions, whatever you want. And you're going to share with your partner starting now. Okay. Now you get to use your art materials. And I'm going to ask you to write or draw what you heard from the person you were talking with. You can get a new piece of paper if you used one already. We have lots of paper. I'm going to give you about a minute and a half to draw or write. Sorry. I'm getting complaints that that's not enough time to make art. And then after you've done that, we're gonna share our art. We're gonna do a little show and tell with our art. Okay, we have our first person to share her art with us.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sezi with Cook Inlet Housing Authority in Anchorage, Alaska, and I wouldn't call this art, but so my partner and I talked about what we need moving forward. Dollar signs, that's money, obviously, and then really an analogy of what we're fearing we lose when ArtPlace goes away is this kind of a hub for this community of creative placemaking so that we can continue to learn from one another, not just reading white papers, but meeting in person or on video or whatever.
Okay, next up.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Margy. I'm Tamara Harkavy from Cincinnati, Ohio. I run an organization, woohoo, up the river a little, called ArtWorks, not to be confused with anything the NEA introduced a few years ago. So my buddy here, Dave, is from Utah, and we have some similarities, although he works in a very different field than I do. But what we uncovered was, in the middle of our little pie chart is that word bravery. And that's what we need from the community and from funders and from ourselves as community leaders. And then, very similar to Alaska, we need money. We need an open door. We need an open door for partnerships with policymakers and government, and we need a willing community, and we need to learn how to make better choices within our communities. And then finally, what Dave talked about was policy is, this is so cool, policy is synthetic to human needs. Oh, I thought you said we need policy that, see, neither of us can hear. Policy should be sympathetic to human needs, but right now it's kind of synthetic. Okay, there you go. I like that synthetic word. Thanks.
All right, who's next? Ooh, all right. Two at this table. So we'll go here first in case you need time for your art.
Hi, I'm Donna Newworth from Reedsburg, Wisconsin, and my partner here is Liz from South Dakota. We're both from rural areas. So in rural areas, we talk a lot about silos, but they're usually actual silos. So this image, which you may or may not be able to see, is a very large silo. And when Liz and I were talking, we were talking about the various areas of focus that ArtPlace Arts and Agriculture, which is one of them, which we're very, very happy about. But all those silos are little silos, and we would love for the little silos to bleed out into the large single silo. And silos, as some of you from the rural areas might know, contain silage, which is fermented. And so when it's filled with hay or straw, it ferments. And as it ferments, it gains nutrients. And so when it's fed to the cows, they are basically eating sauerkraut for cows. And so the idea of putting all that stuff together from our various smaller silos and having it ferment and create stronger flavors and dense nutrients for us all to enjoy, and then the bubbles come up and create a thought bubble, which is a healthy community.
Hi, I'm Richard. I'm from Lexington. This is Sharon from Louisville. Somehow the two Kentuckians found each other. So this is our beautiful piece of artwork. You know, if I'd had a little more time. Oh, no, more Kentuckians are there. Hey, Josh. We talked about a couple things. One, that the sort of need for more connection among sort of different practitioners and folks doing this work in a specific place, and especially was kind of emphasized by the fact that that we're both from Kentucky, and I've actually attended one of the workshops that Sharon was helping put together, and I didn't even know it. We'd never met. So I think that really speaks to the need for building stronger coalitions internally. And then do you want to talk about the other part? Are you sure? Okay. And then another part that we kind of talked about, these little squares over here, is a way to build, like once we kind of have a better collective thought here, that we can then more effectively communicate what this is and the value of it to other folks, because we think that Sharon is using the term cultural organizing and talking about that and creative placemaking and just how those terms are incredibly exclusive, and it's really difficult to have conversations with folks both on a policy level and on a ground level about what those are, and really they're just like coming together and meetings and like these things that are already very common to people. And so especially in the context of Kentucky, like how we can more effectively communicate what we're trying to do and the intent behind the work, but that can only be done in the sort of time dimension after we have a more congruous and collective vision for what we're trying to do, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shania Matson. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota, with an organization, artist-led group called Water Bar. The four of us spoke together, so Jan, Jamie, and Millie, a little bit about this concept of placemaking and the other modifiers like place taking, place keeping, place recognizing. And we started to talk toward the end a little bit about whether or not place is actually the thing that centers us, and whether it's something else, and what that might be, and how we want to have that conversation as the field moves forward. And maybe it's practices, and maybe it's ethics, and maybe it's something else. So do you guys have anything to add? No? Okay, cool.
Anybody else? Good, up front.
I'm Kalima Rose from Policy Link. Mine is an edifice of white institutions full of artists, and there's pillars and all the trappings of. And so we talked about how to, and then in front of it is a gathering of the people artists who are holding pallets and microphones and music and drums and the things that create culture and place. And so we talked about investing more in the people artists and their collective beings to have more vibrant places and more whole people. And I don't know, Monica, do you want to say anything? And you know, we talked about the way that more networking and policy work to bring resources and structure to that could be a positive next generation activity.
I'm going to give this to Johnny. And I want, before we move to the next prompt, think about whether anybody had questions that you want to share before we move on. Tell us who you are.
I'm going to step out of the way of the camera. I'm Johnny from Montgomery, Alabama, and I spoke with Maureen from Charlottesville. We discussed a bit of the sort of ivory tower of creative placemaking conferences where we're basically preaching to the choir. and how it would be great if the leadership in creative placemaking could look to place the community leaders in sort of mainstream markets, develop housing, social outreach, community conferences to bring the message not to the choir, but to the folks that need to learn it, and helping build that bridge. Can you show the art? Oh, there's the ivory tower. There's the choir. That's the disconnect, and there's a dotted bridge. That's it.
Very nice.
Would you like it?
I do want it. And are there any more or any questions? Good. Oh, good. Okay.
Hey everybody, I'm Josh Miller with Ideas X Lab. We've been happy to have you all here in Louisville over the past few days. So Sean, who's based in Bloomington right now, and I talked about a few things. Mine's a floating set of words that all funnel into this field. But we really talked about outcomes and how we think about a multi-dimensional return on investment for this work. One of the conversations yesterday, somebody asked, how many of you think you're doing transportation work? And most of us did not raise our hand. And the point he was trying to make was, we may not be, quote unquote, doing transportation work, but almost all of our work intersects with transportation work itself. So how can we think as a field about measuring our outcomes in a structured way that then gives us that leverage to talk about the investment in arts and culture and its impact? You raised up language and the communication piece across silos, which is really important. And we also talked about, as we think about engaging community members, how can we shift our language from talking about inviting people to the table to recruiting them to the table? Because even just that language of the value that they're being recruited and bringing is a different way of recognizing that. And then obviously thinking about what is the sustainability and funding, and how do we think about that in looking at the bingo card that ArtPlace's created, the different resources that we have, and all of our different collective work. Did you want to add anything?
Calvin Gladney, Smart Growth America, headquartered in DC. So this is just a question from the new guy, caveat it. I saw something that said that we're sort of getting away from case studies and we're moving to the how-tos. And I guess my question is, are we finished with the case studies? My thought was, we often learn a lot not by doing one thing once, but doing it more than once. So we bring a theater to Chattanooga, creative placemaking, it's a form of engagement, it works. Like, is that replicable? Or do we need to go back and understand whether that was just, this was the first skim of creative placemaking and these were the best in class examples, but they're not replicable because we never go back. So it's just a question of whether this idea that we should be already past case studies and now just to how-tos based on this first couple of years of a go-round is the right approach, considering you often learn both mistakes and best practices when you go in depth and you go back places. So just a question.
So I can respond to that, and then I tried to take notes as everybody else was speaking, and so I can give some quick responses to everything else too. So first, case studies. So Bridgespan in their research, right, suggested that we move away from case studies and more to how-tos. I think what ArtPlace's plan is to actually continue our case studies, right? We haven't gone through that bingo card yet, doing all of the work that we need to do in each of the sectors, and we haven't done sort of the cross-sector analysis either. And in those, in each of the sort of field scans, there are case studies, and then in the work that happens after the field scans and after the working groups, there are often case studies commissioned. So we are not shying away from those yet. I think we completely agree that the more that you do, you learn more how to do them well, what to lift up within each of them. So, no. So we're ignoring the advice, but we're also trying to figure out what are how-tos, what do they look like, what are the tools that we have in the field already that are really useful, And how do we build on those and make them stronger and better? And most important, more accessible. So one of the things in the survey, if you look at all of the results, they talk a lot. People said there are resources. In one question, I forget what the percentage response was, but it was a high response that there are these resources. And then they also said that they couldn't find them. Right? And so we need to figure out how to get resources into the hands of people that are actually using them and know where to find them. So that's to answer your question. And then let me go through a little bit of what I heard before, and forgive me if I forget something. ArtPlace, what Jamie talked about yesterday, is that we're planning on doing a lot of comprehensive community planning and development. We've been very sector-based in the work that we've been doing purposely, and really want to take the next couple of years to look at more comprehensive work. So local tribal governments and what they're doing, CDCs and what they're doing, other nonprofits that are working in that way. And that is sort of the point, is to really think about, okay, what are the policies that need to happen there? How are we integrating arts into that work? And how is it happening? And so that, I think, gets to the silo issue and really thinking about the comprehensive, bringing together all of the different sectors and creating and learning what it means to work more comprehensive community planning and development. People talked a little bit about leadership development and connection and making sure that there's a place for people to continue to get together. And also about the preaching not to the choir, right? And going to these other places, other conferences, other meetings with people who are not necessarily thinking in this way. And so a couple of things. We've been partnering with the National Center for Creative Placemaking. I don't know how many of you have been to any of the regional creative placemaking leadership summits, but we've been really working with them to build up sort of places regionally where people can come together to talk about this work. Not just here once a year, but sort of beyond that, with the idea that that will continue, hopefully, beyond ArtPlace. In addition, we have been talking internally a lot about leadership development and figuring out what does that look like. Some of that is actually supporting and sending artists to and others to non-traditional conferences that we would usually show up at. So thinking about that, and then really investigating what it means to develop leaders, right? And or more, not so much develop, but support leaders in the field, and in particular, supporting artists who are doing this work to become sort of leaders in the field who are going out and talking about their work a bit more. I think that's about it for now.
Anybody else?
Sure. Great. Well, I think just in response to the case studies, I think that's a really interesting question, because in just even a short period of time, the work has evolved so robustly and in so many interesting ways. So I think it's an imperative for us to continue to tell those stories, and with each iteration of telling what's happening in community, I think we become more articulate. So I agree. It's something that has to be replicated and continued, and something we think often a lot about. And sort of a risky investment, so to speak, that the NEA made starting in 2015 was in a new category of grant making for knowledge building. And this was a really explicit idea. Got to give Jason a lot of credit for his thought leadership on this, which was to really recognize that there are existing networks that are influencing practices on the ground locally in community. And how do we embed arts and culture into those networks as a tool, and sort of looking to the culture bearers and the artists and designers and communities as a resource that will help move forward these organizations' missions, whether it is about improving public park space and accessibility, whether it's about improving transportation outcomes in a community, any number of things. So we've made 33 knowledge building grants over the last 3 years, and it's a really incredibly exciting category of grant making for us at the NEA. These are 1 to 2 year projects that require a partnership between a network organization, meaning that there are folks that look to that network to learn something, whether it's planners who are part of the American Planning Association that are working in communities all across the country, organizations like the National Performance Network, where there's a really incredibly robust and talented group of creatives all across the country who are sort of experimenting and thinking through how their work intersects in place and in community. And the requirement of these grants is that there is a very explicit outcome at the end of it. So there's a report, a toolkit, something produced that really captures the essence of what they learned in that process and can be shared out more broadly and sort of built upon. And so we really recognize this pool of grants as being a way to continue to cross-pollinate and build that network. I think there's a lot of really interesting things and parallels to Kresge's investments that they've made in national network grants. So we're thinking a lot about how do we begin to like thread those needles across all these different sort of seeds that we've put out there that are certainly blooming in their own right. So I know that one sort of top of mind imperative that I have is how do I continue to facilitate those relationships so that it's not always sort of that spoken wheel, but really, you know, the work's happening on the ground and folks who are doing it are connecting. So I'll just leave it there and jump back in. Oh, yes. Thank you, Regina. Yes, I need to plug the deadline. I'm so glad you said that. So we're continuing to make these grants. August 9th is the deadline to apply for the Our Town Knowledge Building category, as well as our place-based projects. So the NEA is continuing to support creative placemaking projects that are happening on the ground in community. It's a little bit different structured from the ArtPlace grants, requires a partnership with a local government or a tribal government. So those are relationships that I imagine many of you already have in community. Some of you might really be from that, that sector as well. So there are deadlines for the place-based projects as well as this knowledge building grant category. So we have some webinars coming up at the end of June, so I encourage you to take a look at that. And particularly if you have a concept or an idea for this knowledge building category, I'd love to have a conversation with you and sort of talk through what that could look like. It's great to see organizations like Nasita here, who was one of our first round of grantees. And we just want to make sure that folks are aware of what each other are all doing and kind of bringing and facilitating those connections.
So, you know, the thing that I love is always the first thing is always about money, but really the opportunity for you guys to do so many things. You're already doing them, and yes, it does require resources, and so I'm going to respond to that a little bit later. But along the lines of what Jen mentioned, at Kresge, our program is, again, focused on creative placemaking, specifically the arts and culture program, but we are tethered to the foundation's overarching North Star and mission, and that's to expand opportunities for vulnerable populations in America's cities. And so really what you have, I think, even at the table is a continuum of support. So as our town grants, you can apply for planning, implementation through ArtPlace, and really with Kresge's dollars, we're really looking at exemplars and focused on exemplars in creative placemaking, so much more seasoned practitioners. And we're a community development foundation at our core. And so we're not, honestly, we're just not going to fund every type of creative placemaking project. Has to be focused on vulnerable populations, has to be focused in cities. And again, for much more sophisticated and seasoned activities. So we invest in place-based initiatives, so neighborhood projects, municipalities, community development, financial institutions, housing authorities, so forth at the systems level, kind of citywide systems. And then as Jen mentioned, we do support national networks, so community development organizations, Smart Growth America, Policy Link, Transportation for America, and others who are not just focused on the housing or any other type of basic, kind of economic and community development practice. It really is around comprehensive community development. So we've been funding this space for since 2011 and 12. We've made over $103 million in investments and grants in this space. And so the tools and the networks, the opportunities that are coming out of that suite of activity is something that in the short term we'll continue to do. So we're still very much making investments in this way and intend to do so for the time being.
And I'll speak a bit about what's going on at Arizona State University in relation to many of the topics that have been brought up. And just to provide a little bit of background, Arizona State University is the largest public university in the country. It is among those that very specifically and intentionally seeks to attract first-generation college students. So there's an equity focus baked into how the ethos of the university gets played out through admissions. And the other characteristic that I think is really important is that there is a wide array of very unusual mashups in terms of subject matter at ASU, where you have scientists working with artists and you have public administrators looking at sustainability and a number of intersections that don't seem to appear other places. In recent years, very recently, in the last 2-3 years, there's been a lot of effort to pull together people who have a lot of skin in the game career-wise in this space of creative placemaking or integration of arts and culture and community development and planning. And Jason is now at Arizona State University. I'm there. There's several others here at the summit that have affiliation with the university. And there's an earnest intention, I think, to see this as a long haul. I mean, one of the things that I think is really important that Bridgespan lifted up in comparison to other fields that we now take for granted, like palliative care, like end of life, way of thinking about healthcare at the end of life, or green buildings that we don't really question anymore. The arc to that was 30 plus years. And we are at a particular point in this journey. And so thinking about next generation and what has to be in place for the long haul is something that we're very serious about at ASU. Some of the work that we've either piloted, that is underway, or planned has to do with curriculum development. And when we're thinking about curriculum development, it's not just about creative placemaking in a bubble or creative placemaking as that lifted up interstitial space, but really thinking about how to integrate it into things like community development programs or social work or public safety. Any number of other professions where it would do us all well if people in those professions actually looked at arts, culture, and design as critical to an equity-focused agenda within those professions. So as much as I've devoted my own career to comprehensive strategies, I am not naive about our tendencies and sometimes the benefits even of having areas of specialization. The question is what kinds of systems need to be set up so that that compost, in a way, you were talking about the different silos. We have a colleague, many of you know, Bert Krenke, who talks about creating compost and creating that environment where all people can thrive, including in a creative way. So some of the work underway is with the support of the Kresge Foundation and in collaboration with ArtPlace, we're doing an online 101 that we're building as an on-ramp to what will hopefully over time be a very robust set of offerings, both in online formats and conventional classroom formats that get at the various dimensions of creative placemaking and the work required therein. There's work that's focused on research and evaluation. One of the things that we know for sure is that the infrastructure to support the appropriate evaluation of these kinds of contributions in the field is very weak. It's underdeveloped. And it is often also laden with biases that we don't bother to call out. So the work around evaluation and research coming out of the ASU will be laced with or driven by this idea of equitable evaluation and the practice of calling out biases that actually get in the way of an equitable agenda, things that we don't question. Who's the expert? Whose expertise are we centering when we're trying to think about how to interrogate an issue? What methods, in terms of research methods and evaluation methods, do we default to that might actually not be the best methods and maybe even be damaging? The ability to call those questions requires intention, and that's something that we're trying to bake into the work at ASU. There's a pilot program for Creative Placemaking Policy Fellows. The intention there was to lift up the work of people who are seasoned in this space and allow them the resources and time to deliver something back to the field. Knowing that there is work that isn't going to appear in traditional academic journals, and that actually some of what needs to be documented, understood, be it through case study or other formats, is something we have to be intentional about breaking outside of the boxes that are typically available to us to publish, let's say, and create new ways of bringing that synergistic perspective from multiple vantage points together to create something new. So I think the question about are we beyond case studies was a really important and interesting question. And I don't think we're ever beyond case studies. And I also think that case studies need to take many different forms. What I do think is that we need to go beyond only case studies and understand what is the suite of tools and resources that actually allows us with some integrity to interrogate the quality of our work and the extent to which it is actually pushing us towards the end goals that we want to see if we're talking about building communities that are equitable and places where all people can thrive. So I think that there's a suite of products and processes that will lead hopefully to a much more robust body of knowledge about how to do this work and how we know if it's working. And I'm going to stop there.
Well, sadly, we have to stop. So our clearly an hour was not probably long enough for this session. I had 2 more prompts, and you could have drawn 2 more pictures for us. I would ask a couple things of you. I would love to have your artwork if you're willing to leave it. So if you are, just leave it on the table, and I'll pick it up. I know that on the ArtPlace website, if you go to their blog, the most recent one kind of updates all of this information about the future, but it also has links to information from the bridge span work, and so you can get all of the detail that you want there, and it tells you how to ask questions and provide feedback as well. So if you didn't get a chance to say what you wanted to say today or ask the question you wanted to ask today, feel free to do it there. Also, I have the great responsibility and pleasure of working with these 4 organizations on ongoing coordination and planning, and so you're welcome to share your thoughts and ideas with me too. And if you need my info, stop by and I'll give you a card before you go. And we'll stop there. Thank you all for being here and for participating and for drawing with us. And let's thank the panel and the funders at the front.